Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. I'll be your host to guide you through the world of traditional folk song as we go through the Roud Index, one song at a time. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. Way back at the very beginning of this podcast, I recorded an interview with Steve Roud where he explained a little bit about the index, so please head back to that introduction if you're unsure what the Roud Index is. We're almost at the end of Season 2 now, and this is Episode 9. This week's song is Roud 19, The Nobleman and The Thresherman. Later on, we'll hear from singers Vic Shepherd and John Bowden, but for now, let's take a look at the history of the song with regular In the Roud contributor Vic Gammon. Well, hello again, Vic Gammon.
Hello, Matt.
Hello, how are you doing?
Not bad, not bad.
Good.
Quite busy recently, but I don't know why I'm so busy, but there we are.
Well, it's nice to be busy sometimes.
Yeah.
I can't quite believe we're approaching the end of Season 2 already. I mean, Season 2 already, yet it's less than a year since I had the idea for this. I remember I had a Zoom meeting with someone in January just to sound out the idea to someone, and then a Zoom call the following week with Steve Roud, where I pitched the idea to our Lord and Saviour, Steve Roud. So yeah, it's been quite a year.
Yeah. Well, it's very stimulating. I mean, I'm interested in these old songs, and I have been for donkey's years. But when you get a focus like today, Nobleman and Thresherman, you start looking at that song in some detail, and that's a different sort of experience to the sort of general interest in reading the stuff generally. So I think it's good.
Yeah, and I'm very glad that podcasts as a thing exists, because it's this kind of thing might potentially have one day in the past been could have been a radio series or something.
Yeah.
But then it would have had to be a bit more sort of, not necessarily general, but we wouldn't have been able to go into such great detail, partly because of time constrictions, but also, just that's the general public on radio, whereas this is people who actually want to hear it tuning in on the podcast. So
I hope they want to hear it.
Yeah. And yeah, part of my occasionally think to myself, I really should have started this podcast like 10 years ago, because then I would have done this for my entire 20s as well. I'm 35 now, so I would have done it for most of my 20s maybe, and I'd already be at Roud 300 and higher, But at the same time, podcasts didn't exist really in way back then, and so it's fine. The best thing I can do is do it now rather than lament the fact that I didn't do it a decade ago.
Get on with it then.
Exactly. Oh, sorry, sir. Yes, I'll get on with it. Sorry, I reverted back to my student lesson. Saying sorry, sir.
No one ever called me sir.
Never called you sir. Roud 19, The Nobleman and the Thresherman.
And the numerous other titles it has. When you go through the collections, they're all over the place. I mean, I just noted down a few here. The Nobleman's General Kindness, The Generous Gift, The Happy Couple. One version is called Hunting Song, which is
okay.
The Labourer or The Honest Labourers. The Squire and the Thrasher comes up. I rather like Good Lord Falkenberg's Generous Gift. I think that's a great set.
Yeah,
and that's not all of them by any means.
So in the hunt, I don't know if we've got access to the one, any kind of text or anything for the one called Hunting Song. Would that?
Oh, it's just that he's a hunter instead of being the squire. He's out hunting. It's not no more. It's more or less follows the main text after that.
That's what I was asking. Is the Thresher now a hunter, or is the Squire a hunter?
The Squire is now a hunter.
It's the Squire, okay.
And but it's a strange thing. So It's
Anyway,
just interesting how these things do change.
yeah, absolutely. So, what's as usual? We start with the story, the plot of the song. What's the song about?
Let's go back to the, as I like doing, go back to the original. Actually, there are quite a lot of copies of it in the the English Broadside Ballad Archive has 7 copies, which is quite a lot for a 17th century ballad. This is an old song. It seems to date from the 1680s, and it's on the go until sort of, in the sometime in the 18th century, and then seems to revive in the 19th, but we'll see. Anyway, let me read the Broadside Ballads introduction, because it just gives you the whole song, really. The nobleman's generous kindness, or the countryman's unexpected happiness, giving a true account of a nobleman who, taking notice of the poor man's industrious care and pains for the maintenance of his charge, which was 7 small children, meeting him upon a day, discoursed with him, and inviting him and his wife with his children home to his house, and accordingly bestowed upon him a farm of 30 acres of land, to be continued to him and his heirs forever. I mean, that's the song, really. You just, if you want to summarize old, some of the broadside ballads of the 17th century, just go to those long titles and you basically have a précis of the song.
I know we had a fantastic. I can't remember it because it was so long, but we had a fantastic one 2 weeks ago on the podcast for
Mhm.
the Three Butchers.
Oh,
Had a
yes.
particularly excellent, like prosaic title. It went on for 3 days. It seemed.
Okay, so I'll just summarize that early version because it's a song that doesn't change a lot. It gets stripped down a bit, but it also continues. I looked at the Pitt's version, which is early 19th century, and that's really the 17th century version, pretty much. It really doesn't change a lot. So the beginning is there's a nobleman lives and there's a thresher. Now this is interesting. Thresher. What's a thresher? Well, he's someone who threshes corn, and that is the winter occupation. So you can't just do that. It's an agricultural labourer because, and he says in the song later that he does various other work as well. But it's the winter work of the agricultural workers. So it sustains you through the winter.
And is that must be why then because there are some versions called the honest labourer
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and the labourer. It's just that's
So
just
he's a
a more
farm worker. He's
general.
a labourer. He's a labouring man. Yeah. So anyway, so he lives in poverty, but he's got responsibility. He's got number of children varies, but in the older versions, it's 7 children. Uh, but he's hardworking and he's cheerful. This is an ideal sort of guy, particularly if you're one of the landowning classes. This is what you want. He's happy and he goes on a couple of verses about him being happy and hardworking. Anyway, they meet up. The nobleman was out on his walk and he met some, and he asked him some questions. Uh, he says, "How many children? You know, how do you maintain your children? How do you do as well as you do? Your labour's hard, your wages are low." One assumes that the squire pays the wages, so he knows the wages are low. Um, and he goes on about being prudent. He's careful to carry home all I earn. He doesn't go boozing anywhere. Uh, and that though it is possible we may live poor, we still keep a ravenous wolf from the door. That's one of the best lines in the piece, I think. Um, so interesting here is a line in I reap and I mow, I harrow and I sow. Does that echo with any other song? Uh, Perhaps the farmer's boy, to reap and sow, to plough and mow.
Oh, of
I think
course,
that
yeah.
phrase may, and actually the farmer's songs will connect it again later because I think the farmer's song boy does connect in some ways.
All right.
So he eats his bread by the sweat of his brow. So this is heroic stuff. And then he's happy with his wife. They pull in one yoke. The family is supportive. His delight is going home to his family. Um, there's a great verse here. Though I am as weary may be, the youngest I commonly dance on my knee, his young child. I find that tent is an absolute feast. I never repined at my charge in the least. So he doesn't mind about the poverty and that because he's got this happy family life. And this is so ideal, it's almost amazing. So the nobleman invites him home and gives him a ring as a token in the early versions. That disappears in some of the later ones. Um, he goes home and tells his wife that they're going to have dinner with a nobleman the next day. She doesn't believe him. She's incredulous. Uh, and there's a lovely bit. Uh, but that this strange story himself he might raise, yet seeing the rings, she was then in a maze. So the wife is amazed by this thing. And they go and dine with the nobleman, and they have a nice feast. Best of, uh, they dine at the nobleman's hall, and there's nice stuff to eat, dainties with plenty of wine. They have a good meal. And this being over, the nobleman gives him a farm. This farm varies in different versions. Sometimes it's as much as 50 acres, sometimes it's as little as 10, but he just gives him, and he gives it him in uh, with all the paperwork and so on. So he's a freeholder. He holds the paper. So then this 17th century. I like I'll read you the last verse. So no tongue then was able in full to express the depth of their joy and their true thankfulness, with many a curtsy and bow to the ground. But such noblemen there is few to be found. I think there's a sort of almost with this amazing picture of beneficence and honesty and this idyllic picture. There's just a little hint that this might not be normality that we're talking about, and that's in the earliest version. So I rather like that. So that's about 17 verses. I mean, when you look at the one of the versions that I looked at the broadside by Walker of Durham. He gets that down to 6 verses. The essence of the story is still there, but he cuts it right down. There's a lot less padding. There's a lot less going on about how happy the man is, and
Yes, because there's the version that I recorded, which is a version we'll come to later on, I think, when I'll mention the traditional singer from Yorkshire called Frank Hinchliffe. And I recorded that on my first solo album from 2012, 12 years ago, album called Broom Abundance, which itself is a twisted bit of a line from a song called Green Broom that's on there as well. It was a slightly mangled Gordon Hall version of Green Broom, and it had a line about Jackie came by a gentleman's house in which was abundance of broom, and so I took that as Broom Abundance, and that's the title.
nice.
But I recorded that, and yeah, it's the Frank Hinchliffe one, and it's only got 5 verses.
Yeah, yeah. I think that sort of cut down. But it's interesting in the 19th century broadsides, you get some. I mean, Pitt produces a version which is pretty much the same as the 17th century version, and we're talking 130, 140 years later, and it's pretty much identical to the early versions. But you also get these cut down 5, 6 verse, 7 verse versions circulating. I think that sort of process of cutting down was not uncommon by any means. And sometimes it's the wear and tear of time and memory. But I mean, I often think it's quite conscious on the part of the printers. If you've got this little space to fill, you want 5 verses, then you chop the song about to make it that.
Absolutely, and I think the 5 verse version is definitely the most concise sort of laying out of the plot.
But it's still the basic same plot, isn't it? The poor hard-working man, the squire meets him, talks to him, and then gives him a farm. I mean, it's magic. It's a magic song.
It's a bit of wish fulfillment on the part of the labourer, maybe.
In all sorts of ways, I think. It's not just that, but I do think there's an ideal around in the 18th, 6th, 17th, 18th, 19th century to be owning your own bit of land and to be producing your own goods for your own consumption. That's a sort of peasant ideal that comes up in quite a lot of stuff. I mean, it's there even in the ideas of the revolutionaries of the mid 17th century. This idea of the small proprietor who can look after himself and support himself through owning the land. I mean, in reality, very few people owned much land. I mean,
Yeah.
land was quite well concentrated, and a lot of increasingly there was a sort of proletarianization of the workforce through that period because even when people, took in a bit of commons or something, there's still the growth of land accumulation and enclosure meant that it got concentrated into many more hands, but still exists it's a bit like the American dream. The fact that many people don't actually, uh, really benefit from it doesn't mean it doesn't exist as an idea. It's a strong idea.
Mm. Yeah. So how common was this song? How widespread is it? Was it a particularly popular song?
I think it is fairly popular. It seems to centre on England. Although we find it got over to North America, it got to Ireland and to Scotland.
Yeah, and we find that the Roud Index has 334 entries, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that's pretty widespread. That's not a rare song. And when you go to the broadside collections, as I say, the early ballads archive, the English broadside ballad archive has, I think, 7 versions in it, which is unusual for a song of that date. Going back to the 1680s.
Oh, is that the earliest we can go with this, the
I
1680s?
think so. I think that's as far as we've got evidence.
Okay, few because okay, in that case, I made a total the 1680s. I made a right blunder on the sleeve notes of my album that I put it on because I wrote has been found in broadside since about 1865.
I did
So
notice that, but I didn't think I'd bring it up.
no, no, it's fine. That was me not doing enough research at the
Well,
time.
of course, and that was some time ago, wasn't it? I mean, the point is, we increasingly, because of the resources, particularly the digital resources, and not least of which is the Roud Index, we know so much more now, and we have access to information now, which is very hard to get. I mean, when I produced my Desire, Drink, and Death book, I mean, Roud numbers existed, but we didn't have anything like the access that we have now to um, to copies and to resources like the Bodleian collection and so on. So I think
Yeah,
that's,
of course.
it does change over time. So we know a lot more and hopefully we'll go online.
Well, thank you. You're giving me a way out there with my
Yeah,
with my wrong information in the sleeve notes of my album. But yeah, so 1680s then. Is that
yeah,
what you just said? 1680s. Yeah, well
yeah.
that's a
1680.
good way back.
It's a good
I
way
was like
back.
because a lot of the times a lot of these songs so far that we've covered have been you can go back as far as like sometime in the 1700s, but it's not. I always quite like it when you can go back into the 1600s.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, and as I say, there's 7 copies, and they're all 17th century except one, which seems to be a sort of reprint later in the 18th. There seems to be a gap in the record then. We don't get much between sometime in the mid 18th century and around 1800 when uh, the big printers, we're talking this is the age of Catnack and Pitts and so on, Walker up in Durham and so on. They start printing it, and there are, I think, the Bodleian collection has 19 copies of the song, which is, again,
Wow.
that's a pretty widespread song.
Yeah.
Now, whether it deserves to be that widespread is another interesting question, but there we are.
Indeed.
It got into some interesting places. I mean, Burns and Johnson produced the Scots Musical Museum in the 1790s, and there's a version of it in there, which I was quite surprised at. It seems to be very much the broadside of the 17th century. John Bell, the great Newcastle-based collector, a really interesting man. I think we talked about him before when we talked about Elsie Marley. He got a version in his collection, which so it was circulated, written down in a wonderful sort of phonetic sort of way by someone else, but it's in his collection. So he found that in Northumberland around 1800, something like that. It's in Dixon, Songs of the Peasantry. It was 1846, and the subsequent editions. Um, and it's, and then it gets into the collections produced around the turn of the 20th century. It's in Grigg Duncan in Aberdeenshire. It's Alfred Williams, Folk Songs of the Upper Thames. It's there. Broadwood's English County Songs has a version of it from Oxfordshire. And Cecil Sharp, of course, has a number of versions of it. So it's around. It's certainly on the go as a song with some vigour in the 19th century.
Yes, perhaps wherever there are working labourers, there are people who enjoy this song. I think in that
Yeah,
way.
but you wonder why they enjoy it. I mean, it's so unlike. I mean, I think Rod Stragling described it as mawkish. I think I can see that point. I mean, it is unlikely. No, there's nothing wrong with having songs with unlikely plots and they're imaginative and so on. That's where it sort of links with the Farmer's Boy in a way, because if you think of the Farmer's Boy, which I think is a 19th century song really, this boy is ragged and cold and he gets taken in by the farm and then he works for the farmer and he marries the daughter and he inherits the farm. There's a sort of magicalism
Hooray!
there that how is social what do you call it, social um, fluidity, social advancement, how is that created? And on the whole it isn't. So
Yeah.
a song that says a story that says it does is sort of interesting, because you think, well, how does it happen? And um,
Yes, what Rod Stradling said, didn't he? Yeah, mawkish sentimentality and forelock tugging always seem to be popular. Yeah.
yeah, but I suppose it ties up with. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, the but you still got to account. These songs, this song and the Farmer's Boy, are popular songs. You've got to account for that. There's something attractive about this for people to bother to learn it, to sing it, to carry it on, to take it to North America. There's got to be something in the song that people like. I think there's the positive side. Forget the gift at the end. There is this idea of dignity of labour in the song. He's an honest labourer.
Yeah.
He works hard. He's jolly. He likes his family. This is a you met this bloke. You think he's a nice bloke. You think he likes his family, enjoys his. Although he's poor sometimes, he gets on as best he can, and he works hard to do it. So there are some admirable qualities in the song, which we could maybe separate a bit from the sort of magical content at the end, the unrealistic sort of content of, yeah, here's a 40-acre farm, old lad, and get on with it, go on. But I think there's genuinely this idea of the peasant idea of the owning your own. If there's any aspiration that's around, in the pre-industrial period, well, into the early industrial period, there is this notion of becoming, just self-sufficient in some way, not having a landlord, not having a master that bosses you around, to be your own boss. That is a strong idea. That is a very strong idea, and it's there in not just in the agricultural world, but it's there in artisan trades as well, to be your own man as a tradesman, to be able to in control of yourself. I think it's a strong ideal. I mean, it's not just that there's always a wish for social advancements. It's that there's a certain security if you do own your own land, your own little plot, your own ability to grow your cabbages and vegetables and keep even in the 19th century, there's this big campaign, 3 acres and a cow. It'd be hard to live on that, to be honest, but, it was nevertheless an idea that was around. So I think I call it a peasant ideal. I think it's there. Increasingly, it wasn't a possibility for most people. It didn't happen. If you look at agrarian history, it's not on the whole like that. If anything, it's the other way. It's that the small plots get taken into larger farms. The smallholders sell out, and then they've got a bit of money for a year or so, and then they're simply join the workforce of the rest of them. But the aspirations that exist in a society are not the same as the reality, and sometimes they're really quite in contrast with it. And I think that's probably says something towards the appeal of this song.
And would it be? I imagine then, if one were to move from being a labourer to essentially being to owning your own business in that way, you would end up being of a better sort of social standing.
I think that's a very important point you're making. I think people are enormously conscious of social status. I don't think class, I mean, in the Marxist sense, class isn't the right word because
Mm.
class, in the conventional way, it suggests consciousness, your consciousness of being a factory worker or something. What you get in the 18th century and earlier is notion of status, that a certain job is above another job at a certain level in society. I mean, where this comes through particularly strongly is in those songs of parental objection to, he wouldn't let me marry with a bonny labouring boy. That's too low.
Well, we had that last week with last week's song, the song "Bruton Town." Last week, the brothers don't want the sister to marry the servant man.
That is
So,
such a theme. I mean, I always thought of I've never done it, but the life is full of unfulfilled aspirations. But this notion of parental objection. I mean, it comes up in dozens and dozens of songs. You've got on the one hand, you've got a notion of romantic love. The woman really fancies this guy, and then you've got the sort of economic idea of marriage, that you don't marry below your status, that you don't um, that there's a sort of economic aspect and a family alliance aspect to marriage. I mean, it's there in some of the novels. I mean, even in the upper class novels, Jane Austen and so on, it's all about how many thousands a year he's got. I think it's you have this contrast, which I find very interesting, between notions of romantic love, which are certainly there, that people meet, they fall in love, they like each other, and then notions of what is expected of you within a society, and how strong the parents' uh, wishes about who you should marry are. I mean, it's quite interesting because if you think of some of the tensions with some of the people of Asian origin in our society today, where arranged marriage is a sort of thing. I mean, there was much more of arranged marriage going on, and marriages of convenience and marriages of mutual support. Supposing, you were a cloth work, you were a leather worker, and you also had your daughter wanted to marry some sort of farmer that could supply you with hides, and so that sort of economic negotiation, that sort of thought went on all the time, and people were poor, people were, this is a period when periods of famine were not uncommon. Periods of food shortage throughout the 17th and 18th century. You had good years and biblical. You had good years and bad years, and the you would want family alliances were really important in pulling you through the bad years, and so marriage was a serious business. I mean, it's always a serious business in a way, but it was very much to do with business.
yeah, and other things like in the song we covered on season one of the podcast, the two sisters.
Yeah.
When you got the elder sister is essentially jealous or very very annoyed at the younger sister because the man in question is courting the younger sister when it should be the eldest sister that marries first because that's the way things were done.
Yep.
You're older, you married first, and so that's why she throws her sister in the lake. Yeah, there are other solutions are available.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this song, the Nobleman of the Thresherman, this song, yeah, it brings about a whole as we've just found a whole discussion on sort of social politics and class politics and things, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating stuff.
It's quite I think the dialogue, there's a strong dialogue aspect to it as well, isn't
Oh
there? The,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
central part of the song. And these dialogue songs are they're not so common in what we consider the folk song repertory, but they are there. I mean, the other one that I really think of that's very interesting, and it has some connection, is the what's it called? The
I think we might be thinking of the same thing. I was just looking up the Roud number.
Husbandman and the Serving Man,
Yeah, I was
which
just
is
about to say the husbandman and the singing man. I'm just
uh,
going to try and find the
which
Roud number.
which brings up some of the, and you won't get the round number. It'll be 10 years time if you get there.
Roud
I
873.
think that'll be. We might as well talk about it a bit because it's.
Well, I might get to cover it on the Patreon sometime. That'll be interesting.
And it's a really interesting example because it's another meeting between, but not a meeting between like a high person and a low person. It's a meeting of two people who are on a similar level and they're arguing over whether being a serving man, a servant to a a noble family or something, and a husbandman, that is a farm worker or a someone who works on the land, is better. And they go through various things. We get better food, we dress better. He said, I'd rather, and that's where the peasant ideology comes out very clearly in that song because he says, I like to see my oxen fat and the corn growing, and they're the things that really satisfy me, not the trappings of silky clothes and
Yeah.
wine and food and so on. So
And that brings back something you said earlier, because there's a verse, but my pleasure's more than that to see my oxen fat and a good stock of hay by them stand, with my ploughing and my sowing, my reaping and my mowing. That's pleasures of a husbandman.
the plough and sow, reap and mow again. That's almost a cliche of these songs, isn't it? A phrase that comes in. But it's interesting in that it's a similar, a dialogue which tries to settle a dispute in this case between what is the best job, and but the husbandman wins in that song. He comes out as saying, no, I well, the serving says, to end my ditty now, I say, Godspeed the plough, for that's the chief stay of our land. That's another important idea, that you can't have anything. The painful plough, the song The Painful Plough, they cannot sail the ocean without the painful plough. It feeds everybody. There's this wonderful 19th century uh, cartoon sort of thing called The Five Alls. And at the top, the king rules all, and then the clergyman pray for all. And at the bottom, there's the ploughman. He feeds all. And the whole edifice is based on that notion that, I mean, even today you get an echo of that. I mean, the farmers have been kicking off about paying inheritance tax today, and there's still this notion that they are the people who feed the country. The fact they've been subsidised for decades to do so, there's still a very strong idea of that. So I think all these ideas are floating around. I mean, they're not particularly addressed in this song, but the fact he is a thresher man, he's a labourer is important because there is this sort of nobility and basic sort of idea that those people, without them, you've got no food, and with no food, you've got nothing. It's that sort of basic idea.
And that's reminded me of another song, the song called The Labouring Man, Roud
Is that you can't do
1156.
without the labouring man? Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
There's a chorus. This is some friends of mine, a group who formed whilst on your folk degree as well. The group called the Teacups,
oh yes, yes, I know.
the four-part harmony group. Sadly, no longer singing together, and they sang the Labouring Man, and they sort of turned one bit into a chorus with, "Now let England do the best she can. She can't do without the labouring man. Old England always leads the van, but not without the labouring man."
That's absolutely it. That is the basis of everything is being able to feed people.
Yeah, and that song in particular is just in praise of the labouring man. Every verse ends
Yeah,
with
yeah,
something to do with yeah, the poor are frowned on by degree. By them you know who never can do without the labouring man.
yeah,
May God protect the labouring man. Every battle you must understand was carried by the labouring man,
yeah.
all that sort of thing. Yeah,
Because if you can't feed it's like Duke of Wellington, an army marches on its stomach. You've got to be able to feed people. So,
yes. What a
uh,
fantastic imagery that is.
but
Yeah,
it's also it has to be inserted into a notion that the orders in society, the different ranks, and as I say, I don't use the word class before the 19th century really, but the status in society. The Mrs. Alexander's famous verse in the hymn, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. There's the idea that society is ordered with these different ranks within it. and that's another reason why social mobility is sort of difficult. And so this is a song about breaking a sort of a barrier, really. I mean, here you've got a man who's simply a wage labourer, with his threshing and the work he does. But then, and all of a sudden, it's breaking the barrier and becoming an owner occupier, even though the circumstances in the song are sort of dubious to say the least. It's about transgression in a funny way.
Yeah, transgression dressed up as mawkish sentimentality.
Or benevolence on the part of a group of people who were not known for their benevolence at all. Um, it always strikes me. I mean, I suppose I read Raymond Williams a long time ago. You go to these country houses. I was at Goodwood, not Goodwood. I was in Sussex in the summer and went to uh, oh God, one of the big country houses, a wonderful big building. Where does that money come from? It either comes from agriculture, in which case it's the labour of people like the one in the song. It comes from trade, which is often tied up with slavery. I mean, the origins are, I mean, these right wingers who kick off about, oh, you're doing Britain down by saying the origins of the fortunes that um, built a lot of these country houses. I mean, I'm just interested in the facts of the case. A lot of when they stopped slavery, I mean, that in the 1830s, the payout, they didn't pay the slaves anything for having been slaves. They paid compensation to the slave owners, and it was a vast sum of money. We were still paying that money off until the late 20th century, the money that it involved in paying the compensation to slave owners for slavery. Now that money fed into the railways, and developed the railway system and building the industrial society. And then people get very upset that some of the third world people who were subject to slavery think they might have a case for compensation. I think they probably do have a case. Are we getting off the
Yes,
subject, Matt?
I think slightly, yes.
Well, it's sort of,
Well,
those big houses are there in the countryside, and they were built out of some fortune, and that fortune was made somehow.
yeah, you got lots of. I don't know how far some of the use of language stems back in this because a lot of phrases seem to be quite common among the different versions, as
Yeah,
far as
I
I
think
could see.
it has a lot of textual stability, this song.
There's always whenever the Threshermans or protagonist, I suppose, his children are mentioned, the word prattle is always turning up in relation to the
Yes,
children.
yes,
They're
indeed.
either um, my children are a prattling and playing with their toys,
Yes.
um, or the others they come round me with their prittle prattling toys.
In the earlier version, it's tattling noise. That's interesting.
Oh,
I don't know what that word means, but it's rather like prattling, isn't it? Tattling. It's just like a sort of descriptive word
yeah.
for noise, isn't it?
Harry Holman, who we're going to mention again later on, has the line, "My children, they come round me with their pretty flattery toys."
Yeah, yeah,
But who knows whether that's just him saying the word wrong by accident.
yeah, or mishearing it or whatever.
And then Sarah Macomb, an Irish singer, had a verse. When a poor man comes home at night, wet and weary, as you'll see, he takes the youngest baby and he'll dandle it on his knee, while the oldest one comes round him with its prittle and its noise, and sure that's all the comfort a poor man enjoys.
Yeah, I'm reading. I'm looking at the 17th century text here. When I come, it's very similar. I mean, and when I come home from my labour at night to my wife and children in whom I delight, to hear them come round me with tattling noise. Now these are the riches that poor man enjoys. So it's really quite similar, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
the wording may change, but the basic sort of sound of it and the meaning of it's pretty stable.
yeah. And there's the
Uh,
American one I'll mention again in a few minutes. Um, yeah, I go home at night just as tired as I can be. I take my youngest child and dangle it on my knee, while the others come round me, their rattling and their noise. And this is all the comfort a poor man enjoys.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's
Um,
yeah, it's yeah, very similar in each one.
There is a lot of stability in that text, I think.
And the same, I think, certainly in the English versions, you get the same imagery of the thresher or the labourer rather, and his wife being described as living like two turtle doves. That imagery is
Yes.
always there, it
No,
seems.
I'm looking at the 17th century version. I transcribed here. My wife, she is willing to pull in the yoke. We live like two lambs, and we never provoke.
Lambs,
So
okay.
lambs, that's quite interesting, isn't it? So,
Oh,
uh,
I wonder when it changed to turtle doves.
turtle doves is certainly were.
That sounds a bit more like a Victorian romantic thing,
I don't know. The turtle dove
maybe.
is there in some quite early songs, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think
Right.
so. I'd have to check that, but I've got a feeling that it's there in songs like, that's fairly well, my dearest dear, the Turtle Dove song, which is a pretty old song.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Got a feeling that's in there, but we can
Okay, fair
check that
enough.
out.
Yeah, just sometimes when we come up against a bit of flowery romantic language, you think, sounds like the Victorians probably wrote that.
Yeah,
There's an argument sometimes for that, but yeah, it's always interesting, and yeah, this thing about the yoke as well, that tends to crop up a lot. I think the
yeah.
Copper family and Frank Hinchliffe had, um,
It's there in
uh,
the 17th century, the yoke.
yeah, Frank Hinchliffe. My wife, she is willing to join in the yoke. Copper family had, my wife and I are willing, and we join both in one yoke.
Yeah. So
So
it's like being
just,
yoked to
just
the it's like being yoked to the plough, isn't it? That's the image of the horse is yoked, pulling the plough, I think.
right. I was about to ask if you could just explain yoke.
Yeah,
So
I think
you have
that
done, so
that
that's fine.
that that's the image, and the 17th century line is very similar. My wife, she is willing to pull in the yoke. We live like two lambs, and we never provoke. It's a good rhyme, yoke and provoke.
Oh yes,
So that
absolutely.
gives it stability in the text. But uh,
And out of curiosity, do we in that what you're looking at the 17th century
yeah,
broadside?
yeah,
Does it have a specific number in terms of the number of acres
yes,
that
it
is
does. It
given?
does. Hang on a minute. Let me
Because
go down.
although it's never really matters because it's just a number, but it's quite interesting.
Uh, I think it does. A farm with 30 good acres of land. That's bang in the middle. The lowest I found was 10, and the highest was 50.
Yeah, it varies because
Oh,
I was looking at Harry Holman, we'll mention it again, had 45 acres.
that's
The
specific.
Copper one was 40.
Mm.
Frank Hinchliffe was 50. Uh, and Peter Bellamy, but his was the Coppers one basically was 50. So yeah, the ones I found were 50, 40, and 45.
Right. No, I did find one with 10, but I can't
10.
remember it.
Wow.
You could hardly, well, it'd be hard. It's a good, you could have a market garden on 10 acres, certainly.
Yeah, yeah.
Grow plenty of veg. I'm not sure you keep much livestock other than chickens or something, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And
interesting.
a lot of time, yeah, it just all these sort of the same phrases crop up. You usually get mention of the harrow and the plow. Normally it's there's nothing comes or nothing goes amiss or nothing comes amiss to me to the harrow or the plow. That's how I get my living by the sweat of my brow. It's that
Yes,
couplet.
that sort of idea. Yeah. And the 17th century one is no, I reap and I mow and I harrow and sow. Sometimes I to hedging and ditching do go. No work comes amiss, for I thresh and I plough. Thus I eat my bread by the sweat of my brow. That is a really good statement of the idea of the sort of labourer who will do anything to
Yeah, the English one, the English sort of versions from traditional singers in the oral tradition that we found, yeah, have got rid of the whole the bread thing
yeah,
and just end up with that's how I get my living
yeah,
by the
yeah.
sweat. Except Sarah Macomb, the Irish singer who had the Jolly Thresher, um, well, sometimes I reap, other times I do mow, more times a hedging and a ditching I do go. When a mist it comes across me, I harrow and I plough, and I earn all my bread by the sweat of my brow.
That's really interesting. I mean, that sounds like a mishearing of this no work comes amiss, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
because that makes sort of sense. There's no work I will refuse, but then the mist comes in.
Yeah, exactly. That's we'll have to ponder that one some more at some point. But yeah, but nevertheless, as you said, it all basically follows the same pattern
Yeah.
and story. It's just the sometimes the turns of phrase are changed and things, which is very interesting. Anything else you want to say, or should we move on to the
I
recommendations?
think I think that covers it. I do think it, like all these things, I think any one song needs to be seen in the context of other songs. I mean, there's a sort of what literary people would call an intertextuality about it, and the sort of ideas in this song, which are quite, they're quite important. The dignity of labour and honesty and hard work and so on, have to be seen in relation to songs like The Painful Plough and the Bonnie Labouring Boy and all that sort of thing. And I think you then start to build up a sort of notion of the mentality that is there. It's not always without contradiction, but it's nevertheless you get some idea of what these people are interested in and about.
Mm, yes,
You want to talk about the
yes.
well, there's two versions I know well, both from Sussex. One, of course, is the Coppers, and there is a lovely recording of Ron Copper doing this.
Well, I was about to say because this isn't technically a Copper family song. This was in quotes, a Copper family song. It seems to be just a song sung by a couple of members of the Copper family. It
Yeah, yeah. Well,
because
I
it's
don't
not
know.
one they sing anymore.
Probably not. I mean, Bob sang it. I heard Bob sing it a few times, but I think there's a recording of him singing it, but there's a recording of Ron singing it, and Ron had that lovely low, very straightforward sort of bass voice. I just find that wonderful. I just wish I had a voice like that.
That's right. Yeah, we got recording of the recording of Ron Copper singing it was a Peter Kennedy recording in 1963,
Right.
and that came out on the EFDSS. Oh, it's on that Bob and Ron Copper
Yeah.
LP
Yeah.
CD re-release, but it's just Ron singing it,
Yeah.
called The Honest Labourer, and that's available on CD. It was a 2015 CD re-release.
I'd recommend that. I just love his singing. I just think his singing is absolutely, unhurried, natural, rich voice, lovely singing. The other one is there's that quite excellent double CD that Rod Stradling put out, just another Saturday night, and there's Harry Holman on there, recorded down at Heathfield or somewhere, and gosh,
I think it was Copthorne.
Copthorne. Okay.
It's that recording and the Just on the Saturday Night it's an anthology of songs from country pubs, but the Harry Holman recording is from the Cherry Tree in Copthorne,
All right. Okay. Yeah.
the 18th of May 1960. If people really want to know.
He's got a great tune. Lovely, lovely minor tune. Just fabulous. I
Oh
mean,
yes, and the band Faustus sang that
did
with
they? Oh,
Paul Sartin sang that with Faustus,
that's
and that they sang that melody, the minor one, and yeah.
yeah, no,
Mm.
that is fabulous. They're the two that I know really, and I'm aware other people have done it, but I don't know. Have you got any other ideas?
Yeah, so also I want to shout out to there's a recording of Bob Copper singing it
Uh-huh.
as well, and this is on one of Rod Stradling's musical traditions label releases, a CD called The Two Bobsworth,
Oh yes.
which is which is which is a Kent folk club gig from 1999,
Uh-huh.
and it's a duo. It's not a duo; it's two solos, but they're sitting together in the performing area of Bob Lewis and Bob Copper.
That sounds good.
And Bob Lewis is still going. In fact, he did a full solo gig at the Lewis Saturday Folk Club in Lewis only within the last month.
Wow, that's good. He was a mainstay of the old sing-arounds that I used to go to when I lived in Sussex. I mean, particularly when Bob Copper's wife was ill and Bob wasn't that active. It was Bob Lewis who organised. The Copper family used to come, but it was he who organised them and
Right,
got
yeah.
people together. So
And that two Bobsworth that's recorded at Nellie's Folk Club in at the Rose and Crown Hotel in Tunbridge in Kent
right.
in October of 1999.
Uh-huh.
And it's basically they sat there together and they did one song each and kept going until they were told to stop. And there is Bob singing The Honest Labourer accompanying himself on the English concertina.
Yes, he did do that sometimes. Don't think it was I never thought he was that comfortable doing it, but
No, but he did it with some blues songs occasionally as well. You get the occasional blues thing.
if you go to I've got this thing called Vic Gammon Audio Archive, which is on the Internet Archive, and if you go there, there's I've called it an afternoon with Bob Copper, and there's my wife Sheila and myself, and we just spent the afternoon with Bob. I was actually doing stuff for short article about a film on the Coppers that
Yeah.
Barry, what's his name, did. But I mean, we just recorded. It's about two. It was over 2 hours worth of recording there. We're just chatting, and he talks about his interest in the blues and the way he got records from from in the 30s of early blues recordings and so on. So it was.
Yeah, he's a surprising figure, was Bob Copper.
Oh, it was interesting. He was warm and friendly and inspirational and a very nice singer. Had a very gentle but interesting way of singing. He got
Yeah.
into the songs when he was in a song. Uh, he was he was one of those singers who was inside it. He really was. Um, you know, the whole thing was an experience for him. And I liked that.
I will mention then a couple of ones I'm less familiar with, and I'll come back to one I'm really familiar with to finish. Um, I mentioned, yeah, the Irish singer Sarah Makeham
Oh, she's a
had,
good singer. She's got a
yeah,
fabulous repertory and very nice, measured, interesting singing.
that's right. And we listened to it just before we started recording. We
Yeah,
listened to a bit of her singing "The Jolly Thresher," although the track was labeled as the Jolly Thresher, yet her version starts, it's of a noble sportsman. Oh yeah, he's the hunter, it's like a hunting song.
yeah, yeah.
It's
But
of a noble sportsman went out to hunt one day. He met a jolly thresher upon the highway,
yeah,
with his flail across his shoulder and his bottle full of beer. He's as merry as a lord has 10,000 a year.
that's great, isn't it?
And so that one, yeah, that's yeah. And Sarah Macon, brilliant singer,
Yeah,
recorded in at home in County Armagh in 1955
yeah.
by Diane Hamilton.
All right.
And there's a musical traditions anthology of Sarah Macon called As I Roved Out.
Yeah,
And
she sang that. She just a bit of personal history. Listening to the early programs called As I Roved Out, which was basically Peter Kennedy, Bob Copper, Sean Boyle, Alan Lomax, sometimes recordings done in the 50s. That's my introduction to folk song. The program started with Sarah Makeham singing As I Roved Out. Just beautiful, just lovely singing.
yes, and that As I Roved Out, and it's basically the complete Sarah Macon,
Yeah.
isn't it? In a way, it's three discs, each with 23, 25 tracks,
Wow.
and Jolly Thresher is the last track on disc
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But it's also available on the Topic CD, The Heart is True,
Hmm.
which is technically The Voice of the People, Volume 24. I keep
Right.
saying this to the listeners. The Voice of the People is a 20 CD set, and Topic did release a further 10 CDs that were not numbered, but nevertheless, technically, The Heart is True. The Sarah Macon CD is the 24th
Right.
volume of The Voice of the People, and the Jolly Thresher is on there as well.
Mm.
So I highly recommend seeking that out. We have access to an American one as well. Eliza Tillett of North Carolina, 1951 recording, sung to Anne and Frank Warner.
Oh, yes.
And their names have come up quite a lot,
Mm.
especially when Brian Peters is concerned. The This is Anne and Frank Warner, the parents of the really fantastic singer Jeff Warner.
But they were important collectors. I mean, everything gets a bit overshadowed by Alan Lomax, and Alan Lomax is important, but the Warners did some really interesting stuff.
Absolutely. And yeah, they did a 1984 book called Traditional American
Yeah,
Folk Songs from the Anne and Frank Warner collection. And in 2000, Appleseed Records did an anthology, a two-volume anthology, and of all those recordings. And the Warner Collection Volume One, called "Her Bright Smile Haunts Me
yeah.
Still," has this recording of Eliza Tillett.
It's a wonderful how a song like this, which seems so English in its setting, the nobleman and the thresher, the language is very much vernacular, rural English. Would get on in the States. I mean, but obviously in a different social situation. But some of the stuff did keep going over there. There are lords and ladies in some of the Appalachian versions of the child ballads. So
Well, yes,
It's
and
interesting.
yeah, the album's sleeve notes said that since the Elisa Tillett's version sings of hedging and ditching, that then this is clearly an English song.
Yeah,
But it does mention that, and it's got as I walked out one morning, all in the month of May. So this goes back to an in the month of May beginning,
yeah,
which happens quite a lot in folk songs.
yeah.
As I walked out one morning, all in the month of May, I met a jolly thrasher, and unto him did say, with a staff upon his shoulder and a bottle of good beer, he was as happy as a lord who had £1,000 a year. And yeah, Thresher, O Thresher, come tell unto me how can you maintain your family with only but one cow?
Yeah.
Your family, it is large, your wages, it is small. How do you maintain them? I know not at all. There you go. There's four verses. So the next two, because it's quite a short one. Sometimes a ditching or a hedging I go. Sometimes I reap and other times I mow. Sometimes I follow the harrow and the plough. I earn all of my money by the sweat of my brow. And then the last verse. When I go home at night, just as tired as I can be, I take my youngest child and dangle it on my knee, while the others come around me, their rattling and their noise, and this is all the comfort a poor man enjoys.
I mean, they're all verses that are there in the 17th century version, aren't they? It doesn't
Yeah.
have the gift of the farm, I take it.
No, it just stops there. But that may be just how much they recorded of Elisa Tillett, or maybe she couldn't remember any more of it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, it could be any of those things.
all sorts of possible reasons.
It is absolutely fascinating how consistent the text has been throughout the years, though. I mean, I guess that's a reinforcement of print, the song going in and out of oral tradition and print circulation, but it is pretty, some songs change a lot more than this one has.
Yes, absolutely. It's yeah. Normally, if especially if it goes to America, it tends
Yes.
songs tend to change quite drastically.
But they tend to get adapted to local circumstances quite often and local references, and
That's right.
that's sort of natural. But this, some would get fossilized like this, I suppose.
And I've got one more recommendation then, which is crucial for my personal history anyway. I never met him, but Frank Hinchliffe from Yorkshire um, was recorded singing this. And the same recording appears twice. He sang it to Mike Yates in 1976,
Mhm.
The Nobleman and the Thresherman, and that's the version that I recorded on my solo CD, Broom Abundance. And yeah, that's the one. It's got that really brilliant melodic bit in the third line because you got oh, I'll sing a verse because I have to build up to it. A nobleman met with a thresherman one day. He kindly did accost him, and unto him did say, You've a wife and 7 children, I know it to be true. Yet how didst thou maintain them all so well as thou do?
Yeah.
And how dost thou maintain them all so well as thou do? And I love that elongated
Yeah.
uh melismata. There we go.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
learning things
well,
from
certainly.
Ian Russell on the Carol's mini season on the Patreon. The word melismata has turned up. Um, yeah, I think that's fantastic, and that same melodic motif is also in the version that John and Vic are going to sing for us later on
Right.
as well. But yeah, that version, the recording of Frank singing that was on a 1977 Topic LP of him singing his songs, LP called In Sheffield Park.
Different part, yeah.
But then Musical Traditions label did an anthology of Mike Yates's recordings called Up in the North and Down in the South. Songs and music from the Mike Yates collection, 1964 to 2000. And there it is on there as well. It's the whole Frank Hinchliffe section in the second disc of recordings. So yeah, it's a nice little list that Harry Holman, Ron Copper, Bob Copper, Sarah Macomb, Eliza Tillett, and Frank Hinchliffe. And yeah, Frank Hinchliffe, traditional singer. His son Roger, I see him occasionally. He's around in sort of Sheffield and the surrounding areas. He attends the Monday night carol sings at the Sportsman out at Lodgemore, and so he's always around. And he sings his dad's songs. And I've heard him sing the Nobleman and the Thresher Man, and it's just it's great to hear. This is the real deal. This is genuine traditional singing in progress. And it's really fantastic.
Good.
Anyway, there we go. That's let's bring that to a close. We've had this is your last appearance on this season of the podcast. If anyone's signed up to the In the Roud Patreon and are listening to this on the day this episode goes out, then tomorrow you can hear on the Patreon, you can hear Vic talking about the third of our 4 carols episodes with a carol called "See Seraphic Throngs," which we'll come to tomorrow. So this week on the podcast and Patreon, it's a Vic Gammon week. Well, more, who could ask for anything more, to quote a song? But it's, as usual, thank you so much for your work in this season.
It's always been interesting to, I've been interested in this stuff, but what your podcast does is make you focus in and have a bit of a deeper look at something, and that's always good. If you I've been interested in this stuff a long time, and it doesn't seem to flag my interest, so that's good.
There we go. Yeah, normally, as I said, from my point of view, if I was doing a bit of research into a song, it would be for the sleeve notes of an album, which I might do enough research to come up with at most a paragraph about it.
A rather long paragraph. Yes.
But yes, we had you as the singer guest in the first episode of this season, and history of the Cruel Ship's Carpenter, and this one. So it's been really great to have you on, and we'll definitely have you more on the Patreon, obviously, but certainly in future seasons. Can't wait to get it all going again.
Oh, jolly good.
But for the meantime, Vic Gammon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
A huge thanks to Vic Gammon for providing us with the history of the Nobleman and the Thresherman. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of this song, sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now are clips of The Nobleman and the Thresher from Harry Holman, The Jolly Thresher from Sarah Macomb, The Honest Labourer from Ron Copper and then Bob Copper, The Jolly Thresher from Eliza Tillett, and finally, The Nobleman and the Thresherman from Frank Hinchliffe.
A nobleman there lived in the village of Blake. There was a poor thresherman, his family was great. He had got 7 children, to most of them were small. He's nothing but hard labour for to maintain them all. Sometimes I do reap and sometimes I mow. The other times to hedging and to ditching I do go. There's nothing goes amiss with me, the arrow or the plough. That's how I get my living, by the sweat of my brow.
Myself a noble sportsman went out to hunt one day. He met a jolly thresher upon the highway, with his flail across his shoulder and his bottle full of beer. He's as merry as a lord with 10,000 a year. Oh, Thresher, dear Thresher, will you come tell to me? How do you maintain your poor wife and family? Your work it is so heavy and your wages is so small. And how do you maintain your poor family at all?
It was of an honest labourer, as I've heard people say. He goes out in the morning and he works hard all the day. And he's got 7 children and most of them are small. He has nothing but hard labour to maintain them all. A gentleman one evening walking out to take the air, he met with this poor labouring man and solemnly declared, I think you are that thresherman. Yes, sir, said he, that's true. How do you get your living just as well as you do?
'Twas of an honest labourer, as I've heard people say. He goes out in the morning, and he works hard all the day. And he has 7 children, and most of them are small. He has nothing but hard labour to maintain them all. A gentleman out walking one day to take the air, he met with this young labouring man and solemnly declared, are you that honest labourer? He said, yes, sir, that's true. How do you get your living just the way that you do?
So I walked out one morning all in the month of May. I met a jolly thrasher and unto him did say, with a staff upon his shoulder and a bottle of good beer, he was happy as a lord who had £1,000 a year. Thrasher, oh thrasher, come tell unto me now, how you maintain your family with only but 1 cow. Your family it is large, your wages it is small, and how you do maintain them I know not at all.
A nobleman met with a thresherman one day. He kindly did accost him and unto him did say, there's a wife and 7 children, I know it to be true. Yet how dost thou maintain them all so well as thou do? Yet how dost thou maintain them all so well as thou do? Sometimes I do reap and sometimes I do mow, and other times a hedging or a ditching I do go. There's nothing comes amidst to me to the harrows nor the plough, but still I get my living by the sweat of my brow. But still I get my living by the sweat of my brow.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums from which they came in the show notes. On to the second half of the episode. I spoke with singers Vic Shepherd and John Bowden to discuss their version of The Nobleman and The Thresherman. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, Vic Shepherd and John Bowden. Hello.
Hello.
Hiya.
Hello, great to see you. How are you both doing?
Not bad at the moment, yeah. Busy, as always.
Yeah, it's of course it's the middle of the carol season as we're recording this, so we're it's non-stop carols and sword dancing at the moment.
Ah, yes, that's right. What us folkies get up to and what we call fun is caroling and sword fun. Yes, I was. We're recording this on a Thursday, and yes, I was out last night singing me lungs out at the carols at the old band room in Dungworth, which it's very. I always love carol season. I mean, the songs are great and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone sees each other quite a lot on the sort of Sheffield folk scene, but it does feel extra special in the sort of carol season mid-November onwards, because it does really feel like a mass community coming together and having a big old sing-song.
Yes.
And we had I think maybe 80 or 90 people last night at the old band room. The capacity for the room is 120, and on last Sunday, because they do Sundays as well as Wednesdays, the Sunday lunchtime sing was full. They had to turn people away.
Yeah.
And so that's and we had 80 or 90 last night, which was marvelous. And one of your regular ones is the Black Bull in Ecclesfield, isn't it? That's
right.
That's one of your regular ones. I went there once. I will do my best endeavour to come to one of them this year.
Yep.
It's I find it hard to commit to going to a lot. I've already committed to going to another extra one next week. So the Plough at Low Bradfield, if anyone on a Tuesday night, if anyone local wants to go to that one, I will be there the night before this episode goes out. That's helpful, isn't it? So we're here to talk about, as we've all heard from Vic Gammon earlier on, we're here to talk about Roud 19, The Nobleman and the Thresherman. But before we get into that, just could you give us a little bit of a history and a background of yourselves and your sort of your musical upbringing, if there was one, and your sort of history with folk music. Where did folk music start in your life, or did you come to folk music? Did folk music find you? What's the story? One of you go first, and then the other one.
Yes, well, it's going to be me first, I think, because I've got a lot of detail from from before I met John. In fact, you might think that there's too much detail, but I've got it all written down here, so
okay,
make of it what you will, and you can edit out whatever you don't. Well, I was born into a family which was very comfortable with dancing, social dancing, ballroom. A great aunt used to teach ballroom dancing in Hillsborough, and allegedly an ancestor of mine, William Taylor, did some step dancing on tables, and that was the inspiration for my brother, Dave Shepherd, to compose the tune William Taylor's Tabletop Hornpipe.
Ah, there we go.
I can't find any. It's just a family legend. I can't find any proof.
Oh, okay.
That he did any, official entertaining, but it's just a family story. But we didn't find this out for a long time. But when I was born, soon after I was born, my dad went for emergency teacher training after the war, and he met Ted Frost, who later became the captain of Brennerside's sword team. And through him, my dad got interested in sword dancing, Morris, rapper, and country dancing. So from a very, very early age, my brain's just got so many dance tunes in it, for all that sort of dancing. I can never remember, or hardly ever remember the name of the tunes or the dancers, but I know the tunes, I can sing the tunes. When I was 8, my dad taught me the Shepherd's Hay jig, so I can do the Shepherd's Hay. Well, I can't anymore, but I used to be able to dance the Shepherd's Hay jig. We did country dancing at school because my dad was the head teacher of a village school in Clayton West. But we used to attend a lot of things in Brennerside. I mean, my dad would obviously go every week or whenever they had the practices for the sword dance and all the other things that were happening in Brennerside. My dad was the director of the first Brennerside Folk Dance Festival, which was in 1951 as part of the Festival of Britain celebrations. And he dressed as a fool in a sort of a Charlie Chaplin type outfit, and he had a pig's bladder with string to hit people gently. Also at primary school, I learned to play recorder, descant recorder, and at secondary school, I learned to play the clarinet. And I've always been interested in percussion. My dad was a drummer, a scout drummer. My eldest son is a good drummer, and I drum a bit. That's all I can say there. It wasn't until 1972 that I was inspired to learn the Jew's harp from a lovely man called David Wright, who is the father of Lucy Wright. Some people will know that name.
I'm very good friends with Michael Wright, in fact, one of the other Wrights.
Yes. Well, I knew him as well. Yes, I've had a lot to do with the Wright family over the years, on and off. But in 1966, I came. Although I was born in Sheffield, but because my dad was a teacher, we moved around a lot. So I decided to apply to Sheffield University in 1966, and I joined the folk dance group. My dance partner was Nigel, and he used to sing and play guitar. But at the same time, I'd met John because we were studying the same subjects. And the three of us began singing together until John and I then had to go to Germany for our third year, and then we lost touch with Nigel, except we've seen him on and off until we sadly lost him last year. And then we John and I were interested in the Watersons, the Young Tradition, the Coppers, Shirley Collins, and basically sort of did everything else together, learned everything else together. But in 1970, I think it was 1970, we were at the Top Red in the old Red Lion in Grenoside at a singing evening that Ian Russell had organised, and that's where we heard significant people singing significant songs.
That's right. We've heard over on the Patreon side of this podcast for the subscribers. We've had Ian Russell twice so far because we're in the middle of a mini season of carols at the moment. Ian came on and did an introduction to Village Carols episode, and then he also did the history of while shepherds watch their flocks by night for us as well.
Yes.
And he will be back in a week or two for another carol as well, for the fourth in our 4 carols. So Ian Russell is well known to us here at the podcast and the Patreon. Over to you, John.
Well, I had a very different musical journey, if you like. Folk music didn't figure at all until I came to Sheffield in 1966 as a student. I was born and brought up in Liverpool. I learnt piano after a fashion as a child, and those were the days when every primary school, or most primary schools, had an orchestra. And I think people were given instruments on the basis of size rather than what they might be able to do with it. So it was very much sort of, you're a little kid, here's a piccolo. You're a big lad, here's a double bass. So I ended up with a double bass.
Oh.
I played in the Liverpool Junior Schools Orchestra. I was in the Merseyside Youth Orchestra as a double bass player. And in my teens at school, we had a modern jazz group, a little modern jazz group where I played double bass. And I was very much into modern jazz in the 60s. And I really, and also into things like the Liverpool scene and things going on at the Everyman and going to, plays by, Ian Esco and Samuel Beckett. I think I saw myself as a sort of a left bank intellectual in those days, how times have changed. And I only went to 1 or 2 folk clubs in Liverpool. There were, of course, lots of them in the early and mid 60s. I only went to 1 or 2 because it was what young people did, not because I was particularly interested in the music at that time. And being Liverpool is predominantly Irish or Irish influenced, and shanties and sea songs. I remember seeing the Graham sisters there, who are a real name from the past. And it was only really when I came to Sheffield and met Vic with her dance background, and then we got into the whole folk area. I started watching Grenoside sword dancers. I'm one of the musicians now, but I've been watching them for the last 50 odd years. And when we went to the folk clubs, which, as I say, is what everybody did, and there were several in Sheffield, the University Folk Club, and then there were, the Three Cranes and the High Cliff, and we used to go to Kiverton in the early 70s as well. And what I realised looking back is that I was always very interested when singers would mention where they got the songs from. We saw Tony Rose a lot, Peter Bellamy, the Watersons, the Young Tradition, and they always mentioned where they got the songs from. So, for example, Tony Rose often used to mention Phil Tanner. So we went out as soon as we could and got Phil Tanner's LP. Peter Bellamy used to talk about Harry Cox, Sam Larner. So, oh yes, where can I find those people? The Watersons, anyway, used to mention their sources a lot. Young Traditions did a lot of Copper Family stuff. And I realised that both of us, I think, from a very early stage, were very interested in listening to the source singers, and not so much the revival singers in their own right. So actually, looking back, there's a lot of revival singers or a lot of revival albums that we've either never heard. People will talk about. I mean, we've got a lot of Nick Jones albums, but it wasn't Nick Jones I was particularly interested in, but people that he'd learned from.
Sure, yeah.
And so there's a lot of revival stuff that we actually have missed out on without meaning to, but simply because we were always interested in the source singers. In 1970, after we'd graduated, Vic went to Germany on a 2-year contract at a teacher training college, and I went to Canada for a year to do an MA. This is the year before I got married. 1970, I was in Hamilton, Ontario, and who should arrive, I think, at pretty much exactly the same time as I did, but Ian Robb.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know Ian Robb from Finest Kind, and now he's done quite a lot of work with Richard and Jess Arrowsmith. And Ian and me sang as a duo during 1971. I left in the summer of 1971 to come back to the UK and get married. We used to go up to a club called Fiddler's Green up in Toronto, and we were founder members of the Friends of Fiddler's Green, run by an expatriate called Tom Kearney and another Scot called Jim Strickland. And I was a founder member of the Friends of Fiddler's Green, and in Canada. That was a club where there was a focal point for any musicians traveling through in North America. So there were people from the UK came over, people like Ali Bain and the Dransfields and people like that, but also lots of American and Canadian singers, Helen Schneer, who we both absolutely love. Michael Cooney, lots of these sort of people, and I then became very interested in American and in particular Canadian versions of songs, because you would hear the song say, "Oh, I know that song, but isn't that an interesting variation of the words or a variation of the tune?" And so, in the same way that we'd done when we used to go back to the source singers that we'd sort of come across in England as students, we started to go back to source singers in America as well. So we very early on we got the lots of LPs from Sandy Payton's Folk Legacy series, the Beach Mountain, North Carolina ones, Frank Prophet, Sarah Ogan Gunning.
All names that have been mentioned on this podcast so far.
And Molly Jackson, all those sort of things. I think,
Yeah.
So we knew, and we were singing some of those songs very early on in the early 70s. But when we came back to England, we found they weren't particularly welcome. I know a lot of American, or a number of American singers who came to England trying to get gigs, and they were told, "Oh no, we don't have American songs here. We're a traditional club." This is something that Sarah Gray, for example, used to complain about, that she would say, "These are traditional, they're just not English traditional."
Yeah.
So there wasn't the same openness, I don't think, as there is nowadays towards American versions. It's not to say that we only did American versions, of course. We did lots of English and some Sheffield songs as well. One particular time we were singing in a club, and the organizer took us aside and said, because this is a traditional club, would you mind not doing any of your American things? So I said, oh yeah, fine. So we just did our normal set, including things which were as American as you could imagine, but not exclusively. And at the end, he came up to thank us for having missed out our American stuff and how how grateful he was. So there wasn't this sort of understanding, which I think there is now.
Sure, yeah.
But I certainly, I really loved, singers like Sarah Cleveland and that sort of understated sort of person. And then, of course, quite as soon as the the Anne Warner book came out, we bought that, and I did some research in Cecil Sharp House into those even before the book came out, and we got a couple of songs that Lena Bourne Fish sang, and the beautiful versions. So we've always been interested in that sort of thing. And Vic mentioned the 1970, and that was at that time that was our final year. Skipping back a couple of years, 1969 to 1970, that was our final year in Sheffield, and we were involved in the Sheffield Survey of Language and Folklore, as it was then, which was organised by John Widdowson and Paul Smith, and we did some research there. Not very much, but we interviewed Lou Rowe, one of the Grenoside dancers and musicians from the 30s. And it was through really that work that we got to know Ian Russell, who was just starting really his research into singing in West Sheffield and also the carols. So,
yeah, that's right, because the carols, because the recordings that went out on that LP, A People's Carol, they were all recorded in the December of 1973, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's all around that time, yeah.
That's right. He was starting to record that. Yeah, we went up to the fountain in Birchwood with him when he'd actually got the masters, and he was playing them back to the company in the pub to see what they thought of it. And so we became aware then of that as well. Then we had a couple of years in Germany and came back and lived in Penistone. So it was a while before we got back into the folk scene, really.
And Penistone, that's a mere 12-minute drive from my house.
Yes, that's right.
I'm in Stocksbridge, so I know Penistone quite well now.
Yes, yeah.
Lovely place.
Yep. So that's that was that. And then like Vic says, 1970, again, something that Ian organised was the evening where we actually first heard not only local Sheffield singers, but we also heard the Nobleman and the Thresher for the first time. So we can pinpoint it practically to if we could remember exactly what date it was, we could pinpoint it exactly.
You've segued right into my usual next question.
That was my cunning plan.
It's almost as if we planned this.
Almost.
Yeah. So my next question is always: can you remember not necessarily exactly, but obviously you can exactly when and where you first came across this song in general? So
yeah, I think that must have been it for me. It's a bit unclear really whether I was aware. I don't know if I was aware of the Coppers version or not at that time. This sort of all intertwined, really.
Well, this evening that Ian organised was an evening of singers who he'd been talking to and recording for his research. So Frank Hinchliffe was there, who has been mentioned lots of times, I know, in these podcasts. George White, Frank Hinchliffe's cousin, who was the person that we learned the Nobleman from. Joe Atkins, who lived in Stannington, very much into the carols. I think Billy Mills was probably there as well. Lou Rowe was there, and Lou Rowe can be heard on the folk songs of Britain, the
Songs of Ceremony.
Songs of Ceremony.
Oh yeah, from those big compilation ones.
Six Jolly Miners.
Yeah.
And he was there, and probably a couple of others who I don't know. I don't know whether Grace Walton was there, but certainly several of the singers that Ian had been recording, and it was a revelation in a way, because even even in 1969, 1970, folk clubs tended to be dominated by people playing guitars or by groups playing instrumental music, and it was unusual if you had an unaccompanied, a single unaccompanied singer. You had groups, for example, like the Young Tradition or the Watersons, with harmonies.
Yeah.
But it was, and then you had Tony Rose, who accompanied a lot of stuff, and Peter Bellamy certainly. And the number of unaccompanied songs that you would hear, or unaccompanied, or singers singing in an unaccompanied way, would be relatively small. And this was a whole evening of people without any instrument in sight at all, and local Sheffield people singing in a Sheffield dialect, and singing for the most part songs that we'd never heard before. George White and Joe Atkins sang The Bower, which we did on our first LP, A Motty Down, which is a lovely little love song with the beginning and the end of a love story, but nothing in the middle at all. And I think we're the only people ever to have recorded it, probably. And there were two men. Joe was an AA breakdown man, and George had a number of jobs in Stannington, and there they were, two men singing this love song perfectly normally. And what struck me was also that, and I think it's quite important really, that there's a lot of talk about, how do you recognise a folk song and how do folk singers sing? You'll know yourself, on the ballad tree, Brian Peters of this parish has been involved in long arguments with another member who I won't name, or a couple of other members, about how singers sing and what real folk singers sound like. And it's very, very variable, because people like George White and Frank Hinchliffe, and of course you will know that the same is true of Roger, his son, and also James, Roger's son. They're very diffident singers, very withdrawn, very quiet, whereas Billy Mills was very exuberant, and he was an entertainer. For some reason, the word entertainment gets one of these contributors' hackles up every time the word is mentioned or hinted at, So they're very, very. He was very exuberant, and I remember Norma Russell saying that when you were in a group and you heard suddenly somebody would start singing, and you'd look around and say, "Who is it that's singing?" And it would turn out to be Frank, but you wouldn't realise at first, because he'd be sat there with his head down, his cap pulled over his eyes, and it's him. Yes, of course it's Frank. I can realise now. And the same, I think, is true with with Roger. I remember once he told me in horrified tones that he'd been invited to Whitby, obviously, I think probably through Ian's auspices, and they'd given him they'd said, "Oh, right, we put you down for 45 minutes." And he was absolutely horrified, because he only wanted to do one song at a time, "Oh, I couldn't do it. I'll never go again." I thought to myself, well, if it was Matt, he'd just have to do one of Gordon Hall's shorter songs.
Yeah, I'll just maybe two Gordon Hall songs, maybe, if I sang.
That's right, yeah.
But I remember a long time ago, someone had booked, Sidmouth Folk Festival had booked a Scottish harmonica player and given him a 25-minute spot in a gig, and he said, 25 minutes? I think I'll run out of breath after 25 minutes of just playing the harmonica for 25 minutes, because he was in his late 70s by then, so maybe in early 80s, and he was horrified to be given a almost half-hour spot just playing tunes on the Muthi. Yeah. So that's, So
that evening was really pivotal for us, because then I went to Canada and came back, and so that combination of knowing about the Sheffield songs, and having fallen in love with a couple of the songs, like the Bowden and the Nobleman, and then also being interested in variants, Canadian variants, North American variants, because we never do cowboy songs or anything. They're always songs which are recognisably usually Anglo-Irish or Anglo-Scottish in origin, but interestingly different enough to be worth singing, you know. We like to start singing something and then people say, oh, I see what that song is.
That's right. I've got a very good LP somewhere in my collection, which is a Canadian woman, Lorena Clark. That topic LP, which is literally says on the tin, British ballads from Ontario.
That's right. Yes, we've got 2 LPs by her, and we do a few of her songs. She is absolutely brilliant, and she says something that's very, very important. I think she says, when I'm, she talks about all the people in her family that she's learned songs from, and she says, when I sing a song, I'm not singing a song, I'm singing an ancestor.
Right.
I think is a wonderful quote. She gets inside, you know, she remembers who it was, you know, and this is what happens. I mean, Roger does his dad's songs, whatever his dad's songs are, you know, and he doesn't stop to think, is this a big ballad? Is this acceptable? Should I not sing this because it's only a music hall song? You know, it's
yeah.
But yeah, that's where we got the Nobleman from, and I think we do it pretty much exactly as close to the text and the way that George sang it as we can. Obviously, being a lot younger than.
Yeah, so I was about to ask because you mentioned both Frank Hinchliffe and George White. So this was George who sang it that night, George White.
Yes,
because it's quite a bit longer than the Frank Hinchliffe one, and the Frank Hinchliffe one is the one that I know and I sang on my first solo album.
Okay.
And so it's obviously I haven't got the text. I couldn't find the text to hand, but there's more stuff in it than what I think the 4 maybe 5 verses that Frank had.
Yeah, there's an extra 3. The Coppers and Frank's version all jump into a nobleman met his poor thresherman one day sort of thing, whereas George's starts off with a nobleman lived in the village. Actually, he sings of Leek. I've wrongly connected it to village of Late to make it rhyme with a nobleman lived in the village of Late. He had a poor thresherman whose family was great. I sort of unconsciously made that.
But I think it's overcorrection several ways, isn't it? You know, you hear things wrongly and then you think, oh no, that must be wrong. I'll change it again. So who knows what it started.
So there are two verses, because the second one is so carefree and constant each morning he went unto his daily labour with his flail on his shoulder.
Oh, so that's all a precursor to the Frank Hinchliffe one, essentially. It's all.
That's right. And then the nobleman comes up and talks to him. Yeah. And then there's that last verse, their tongues were not able for all 4 to express the depth of their joy and the thankfulness and the curtsies and things. Frank doesn't sing that either.
Right.
Oh yeah, it's I think it's 8 verses rather than 5.
Right, okay. George. Yeah, I'm just looking at the text for the not really saying the Copper family version because the family don't sing it, but the version that Bob Copper used to sing and his dad, his cousin Ron used to sing, The Labourer, and it's in the book A Song for Every Season by Bob Copper.
Yeah.
And I'm just checking the back of the LP for the words labourer. I don't think it ended up on the A Song for Every Season LP set, but it's certainly in Bob's book, A Song for Every Season. And I'm just checking the number of verses there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Now, where's the extra verse? What are we? So it's got 1 precursor verse, as it were. You've got it was of an honest labourer, as I've heard people say. He goes out in the morning and he works hard all the day, and he's got 7 children, and most of them are small. I love this detail that most of them are small.
Most of them, yes.
He has nothing but hard labour to maintain them all, and then you get, instead of a nobleman, he's a gentleman in this one.
Oh, yeah.
A gentleman one morning walking out to take the air, he met with this poor labouring man and solemnly declared, I think you are that thresher man, said he. Yes, sir, that's true. How do you get your living as well as you do? And then you get the sometimes I do reap and sometimes I do mow verse.
Yeah.
Then you get when I go home at night, just as tired as can be, I take my youngest child, dance on my knee. Then you get my wife is very willing, we join both in one yoke. And then, yeah, the gentleman awards him 40 acres.
Oh, 40. Oh,
40. Yeah, well done, you honest labourer. You speak well of your wife and family. And yeah, so that's 6 verses. That just has one of those earlier verses.
Yeah.
So the melody that the Coppers, Bob and Ron Copper, had is quite different from the one that is known to me and yourselves, because we've learned this from the cousins. I learned it from Frank Inchliff and you from George White. But it's interesting that they're cousins, yet it's not the same version. The George White one has more verses, and although the melodies are similar in their sort of structure and melodic pattern, they do vary as well. And I do wonder, do we know where they learnt their songs from, and if was it the same person? How did those two different ones get to be as similar yet different, even though it's the same family?
Yes. Well, interesting you should say that, because Ian Russell wrote an article in the Folk Music Journal in 1987 where he was talking about stability and change in a Sheffield singing tradition based on his PhD.
Oh yes, I have it on my shelf here.
You would have.
And I've just paused it. I've just paused the recording and I've just grabbed it off the shelf. Now it's in my hand. Ta-da!
Yes. And he says there that I'll just read it. He says, when I recorded Frank Hinchliffe and Grace Walton together singing Nothing Else to Do, which they'd both learnt from the same source, Grace's father and Frank's uncle, Tom White, their interpretation of the melody was clearly at odds. Yet when they finished their performance of the song, it was the textual disagreements of which they were aware. And Frank commented, you see, what's happening in places we're just not saying with words. The stylistic implications of this incident are far-reaching, as it encapsulates an attitude I've often encountered in West Sheffield, that a singer conceives a song in terms of its text, whereas the melody functions subconsciously as the vehicle of its expression. So they're more interested in keeping the text and not so worried about changing the tune, changing the melody. And he mentions several examples in this article of people saying, "Oh, the words are not quite right," or somebody will be looking at the book where he's written down the words, and then he'll say, "Oh no, that's putting me off because those words are not quite the same as what I sing. It'll be better if I close the book and I'll sing it without the words." Whereas, the melody, they seem to be less worried about alterations, and yet there it says they both learnt it from Grace's father, Frank's uncle, Tom White.
Yeah, it's weird because they're less worried about the melody, yet it's the words for the two differing versions of Nobleman The Thresherman that differ more than the melody differs.
Yes, but the basic sort of core of the story is the same, isn't it? I mean, this is what interests us about the versions from like Canada and North America, that the story is felt to be so important. You can put it to, it's almost like Wild Shepherds. You can put it to almost any tune as long as you get the core of the story over. I mean, we sing. You were talking before about the Raggle Taggle Gypsies, Gypsy Davy, whatever you want to call it. We sing a song called Clayton Boone. I don't know if you mentioned that in the podcast you did, but it's
6 months ago. I can't remember.
A cowboy version of it. And at first, you've no idea what's going on because it's Clayton Boone, who is a real person, turns up and says, "What's happened to my wife?" And then he's told in verse 2, she's gone with Handsome Davy. And then the basic story then exactly the same. He follows her tracks them down, says, "Come back to your, your fine bed, and come back in." And she says, "No, I would rather sleep at the warm side of my davy, even though it's cold, rather than come back to the bed." And the text is quite different in some ways, and yet the core of that story, if you were to sum it up, woman falls in love with handsome stranger while husband is absent, follows handsome stranger, husband follows her and tries to persuade her to come back, and she says, "No, I would rather live a life of penury than come back to your fancy bed and all your wealth." It's exactly the same, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which apparently was learnt from the singing of Cowboy Harry Jackson, which is one of the least cowboy sounding names I've ever come across.
That's very good. Yeah, all the variation and melodic and textual is part of key to part of the attraction of a lot of folk music and folk songs and tune stuff is the amount of variation. I think it's just if every song had one set version and that was it, then it would be. I mean, it would still be great, but it would be a very different beast. You know, the Roud Index, for example, would have probably one entry per song rather than however many entries per song.
And you might actually get through them all before you.
Well, I've still got to do one song per episode, so probably not.
That's true.
But yeah, because I don't know if I mentioned this, the Roud Index, as I've said before, has almost about 47,000 songs now. But the number of entries, because that's multiple entries per song, we just covered a carol, or I've just recorded a carol, in fact, which for the Patreon mini-season on carols, which will go out tomorrow, the day after this episode airs, with Vic Gammon again, and that's there's only 2 entries for that in the Roud Index, so that's one of the highest Roud numbers I've covered so far, and also the lowest number of entries. Only got 2 entries, whereas Barbara Allen, which is a song that's it's coming up not too far off in the distant future. Barbara Allen Roud 54. So tune in the first third of 2026 to hear the Barbara Allen. But the Barbara Allen now has almost 2,000 entries in the Roud Index, and so there may be only almost 47,000 songs in the index, but the total number of entries now approximates 750,000.
Yes.
And that's brilliant. There are so many variants of all these different songs in a lot of cases. That I think that's the beauty of a lot of this stuff, and the differences, but also the similarities within the differences. In a way, is that like the Frank Hinchliffe version that I do and the George White that you do. Yeah, the melody not quite the same, but it does still have that. The bit I sang to Vic, the bit at the end, Vic Gammon, the bit at the end with the ba 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 da da. It's got that bit at the end of the third line, which is it's one of the most attractive. It's not the most attractive bit, but it's one of the bits that drew me to the song in the first place when I heard Frank's recording of it.
That's right, and it gets people joining in. It's something that, and also we always say it's almost like an IQ test, because a lot of the time you can guess. We always say when we sing it, join in as early as you like in a verse, because quite often, sometimes we are hard up and sometimes very poor, but still we keep those raging wolves away, over to you, from our door.
That's right.
That's how I get my living, by the sweat, of my brow. And so people join in quite often earlier on, and then they've got a chance to sing it. That's how I get my living, by the sweat of my brow. So it's a really satisfying song to sing, isn't it?
Yes, or I've found a lot of people tend to not know what's coming, and so you get how a living by the sweat of my, and then we go brow, but everyone comes in after of brow, so you get this audience just going ow, and just the syllables. It's quite funny, but then they get to sing the line again, so it's all fine. And so that's one that you two sing together in harmony, isn't it? John, you're on the melody, and
well, I join in the refrain.
Right, but in
Yes,
harmony
in
though.
harmony.
Yeah. Yes, love harmony singing, and it's very. It's a weird thing to say. They're all singable. It's a very singable
It is.
melody, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, yeah, the one that you sing and the one I sing are similar enough to say this. But yeah, it moves about a bit, but it's quite
Yeah.
pick
Yeah.
upable.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. And it's got a very English, rural English character as well, you know, which not everybody associates with Sheffield. I mean, people from outside Sheffield think, oh, it's probably all songs about, you know, grinders and people working in steel mills and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, but they forget how much of a rural area that is to Sheffield, the edges of Sheffield.
Well, yeah, exactly. As Vic was saying earlier, just because it's the man is labelled as a thresherman, that just means an agricultural
Yes,
labourer.
that's right.
It doesn't. It's. I mean, threshing is a specific job, but that implies that he is the character question is a general labourer, as indeed that's why the copper version is called the labourer and sometimes the honest labourer. It's just it's a blanket term, but it's not just mills and grinders and stuff. It's agricultural labourer. And so, yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
One thing that I always puzzles me about this song, I don't know if you or critical reaction to it. Do you want me to talk a little bit about?
Sure, yeah, that's fine. Go for it.
Well, I'm not sure why this particular song, which is not very widely sung, why it attracts so much vehement criticism. I mean, I've been told more than once I shouldn't be singing it because it reflects an unrealistic picture of sort of class relationships or whatever.
What do you mean in the sense that the more well-off guy just gives the labourer some land and money?
Well, yes. I mean, I think you know the Rod Stradling quote: "A mawkish sentimentality and forelock pulling always seem to be popular." You know,
That's right. I mentioned that to Vic Gammon. Yeah.
There's a site called Sing Yonder. I don't know who does it. You might do.
Oh, that's yes. Sing Yonder is Carl Sinfield. Carl Sinfield, very instrumental in helping me set up this podcast.
I mean, it's a very interesting site, but about this song, he says, "Call me a cynic, but I'm going out on a limb to suggest that this is not a personal account of the heartfelt gratitude of a farm labourer, but more likely a wealthy nobleman attempting to glamorize the digging of ditches in British weather to maintain the status quo of the brutal class inequality of the time," which seems a very harsh comment. And my comment would be, why is people in general, you know, seem to be so critical of this song compared to other songs? I mean, there are a lot of often when I sing this song, I say, "Oh, it's one of," as a joke, one of the vast number of songs about a generous Yorkshire farmer or landowner who just loves giving his money away. You know, that always makes Will Noble laugh. But you know, if you think of the farmer's boy, all the little chickens, thousands or more, you know, all jolly fellows, he calls his master a liar. Things like, you know, the gypsy's wedding day. You know, how often did that actually happen? That a gypsy sort of pretends to tell somebody's fortune, and also the Yorkshire bite, well sold the cow. You know, where the version we sing is Jack the Cowboy from Labrador, and he's robbed on his way back from selling the cow, but he jumps on the robber's horse, rides back to his master's house, and at first the master is angry with him, you know, the farmer master, and they open the saddle, and there to behold £5,000 in silver and gold and 2 brass pistols. And the farmer did vow, "You've well sold my cow, and now for this brave and this honourable day, half of this money will come to your pay, likewise my daughter to be your sweet wife." You know, so there's a lot of songs which either have unrealistic, you know, sort of scenarios where a deserving poor person is suddenly out of the blue, sort of wins the lottery of life, you know, or or songs of what you might call rural contentment, things like "We shepherds are the finest men," pride in the skill of that you can do, and it's they're obviously not realistic. They're not supposed to be, and I sometimes think that when people of our age, I'm not including you, Matt. I mean,
Thank you.
my age, when we got into things in the 60s, there was a sort of a radical atmosphere in general, and I think we were looking in folk songs for evidence of a radical history. We wanted an alternative history to the ones that perhaps had we been taught at school, which was nothing but battles and glorious, British armies winning everything in sight. And while there are a number, particularly from the 19th century, and particularly from the north, the factories, and people, were writing songs of protest, obviously, and songs of describing hardships. I think we sort of almost retrofitted a lot of songs, wanting to see. This is just me talking off the top of my head, really. Wanting to find evidence of radicalism in English folk song, and I think Brian Peters has worked out there's a fairly small number of actual critical radical songs in the tradition compared to the number of just stories that may be unrealistic but might be nice for people to sing in their families or in the pub. I mean, if you listen to what they sing on the Blacksoul tapes or the Eel's Foot or the Copthorne ones, there aren't any radical songs there. There's the Nutting Girl and General Wolf and Young Man from the Country that Cyril Poker sings.
Yeah.
They're not radical. Listen, fellow farm labourers, we ought to rise up, and later on you get all the Captain Swing sort of. Well, I say all the Captain Swing songs. How many of them are sung nowadays? How many have actually been sung? And when you look at the songs that Ian collected from his informants in West Sheffield, yes, there's one or two what you would call big songs like Edward, Frank Hinchliffe's Edward, but then Stanley Marsden sings "I Wouldn't Leave My Little Wooden Hut for You," and if you've been in an evening of singing with those people, they'll sing, the volunteer organist and all this sort of thing. In fact, I said to Roger once, I said, I think I've only ever heard you sing your dad's Edward once. Is it not a song that you sing about? Oh no, he said. Oh, I don't like. Oh no, I'm not keen on it. It's a miserable old thing. And then he immediately started singing "The Miner's Dream of Home." So people have just they like singing songs, and sometimes there'll be sort of fairly realistic ones talking about, oh yes, I know just what that situation is like. I've fallen in love and been unrequited in love. Sometimes they're almost fantasy, and sometimes they're as I say, winning the lottery of life. I mean, Frank sings Granny's Old Armchair, and it's much more interesting what happens to a song like that when Frank sings it. He changes the text and the tune, but you're not going to turn around and say, oh, come on, how many times did that happen? How many times did people get an old armchair from their grandmother left in the will, and then suddenly they find when it falls apart there's £10,000 in used bank stuff down the back? Obviously not. It's a story, isn't it? And I think we sort of tried to retrofit, really. And I mean, Brian's done a lot of stuff about this as well, like, things like the Recruiter Collier, where two of the and also Dave Arthur, two of the most often quoted verses from the Recruiter Collier of "As I walked o'er yon stubble field, beneath it runs a seam. I thought of Jimmy hewing there," but apparently were written by by Bert Lloyd. Great, it's a great song, but it's slightly different from saying this is evidence of the downtrodden peasantry expressing its fury through its songs, and people like Frank, people like Roger, will sing songs because they're songs that were sung in their family. Lena Bourne Fish will sing songs that she associates with her family. Texas Gladden, which is where we got the title from our latest CD, Revel in the Stories, was talking about when her mother used to sing songs and she would picture the whole story unfolding. The fact that that was the story of Mary Hamilton or something like that had no connection whatever with her life. It was a story, and she would close her eyes and imagine that unfolding and see all the pictures,
And anyway, I think for all its criticisms for people criticizing it for its sentimentality and forelock tugging, thank you, Ross Stradling, Carl Sinfield in the Sing Yonder Volume 2 book, when he talks about this song, he says, I just think, whatever the intention at the time of the song, and the context of it, whatever, it's a breath of fresh air after all the murder. Yeah. And I think there's something in that, in terms of variety of songs sung in an evening. Yes. I think, it's great to have something sentimental occasionally, because you do need a break after the demon lover and whatever else. Anyway, that's all by the by. Let's move on to some recommendations of some other revival singers singing this. I know you've got a few.
I mean, it's fairly wide. It's not terribly widely sung. It's not one of the most popular songs, and of course, a lot of the versions come back to the Coppers or to Frank Hinchliffe's or maybe to Harry Holman as well.
That's right.
Certainly, I would recommend Paul and Liz Davenport on their CD Springtide Rising, because they sing quite a different version, really, that they collected from Arthur Laycock of Wentworth Woodhouse. And that's, very sort of interesting variation to what we've been talking about. I know that the Dolly Mops from the Isle of Wight have recorded it, but I haven't heard it. I don't know whether you have, Matt.
I don't think I have. I imagine that somewhere in mine or my parents' CD collection is their album Long Songs, because we were good friends with Virgil Philpott from the Dolly Mops for a while. They were around for a while, and we haven't seen them for a while. So I've certainly been in their company, and I've probably heard the CD.
It'd be interesting to know whether theirs was a specific Isle of Wight version or whether it's.
I think, although I've got the sleeve notes for that track are up on mainly Norfolk, and I think they just, because it says, I'm a bit confused. I'll have to ask them if I ever see them again. But the idea is that album is traditional songs from the Isle of Wight collected by W.H. Long. Yes. But then the sleeve notes say the tune is from the scene of Harry Holman recorded in Sussex. So maybe the words are from an Isle of Wight version. Yeah. I'll have to investigate that one a bit further. Yes. So the Dolly Mops, I thoroughly enjoyed the Dolly Mops as a performance thing. They were great.
Will Noble sings it. I can't remember if he's recorded it or not. I think you were saying he'd recorded it on a cassette, but I've heard him sing it live, and of course he's still singing.
Oh, and he got that from Frank Hinchliff,
and he got that directly from Frank Hinchliff. So he really is a direct line of descent, so to speak. Lovely singer. I would recommend anything that he sang, really.
Yeah, that's on. So Veteran Records I've mentioned a few times, and a link to Veteran Records is always in the show notes on wherever you get your podcast from.
Yes.
I always put a link to Veteran Records, run by the late John Howson and now Katie Howson and Mossy Christian, and Veteran Tapes, as it was originally called, because it was out on cassette. Did a whole Will Noble album on cassette of Southwest Yorkshire songs called In That Beautiful Dale, and that was released in 1992. all tracks recorded by either John Howson or Ian Russell. But I'd love to get my hands on a copy of that one. In That Beautiful Dale, the album is called. Will Noble.
Yes.
And Will, what a wonderful singer.
Yes. The other one that I would certainly recommend listening to is by Faustus. I think you know a lot more about them.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to that one in a minute or so's time.
But what struck me was they used they have a chorus. Sometimes I do reap, sometimes I do, but they use that as a chorus. It's a very truncated verse, but it's very interesting because it's both sparse accompaniment but also very very rich because it's basically Saul Rose's Melodian, but with the number of the amount of very complex chord changes in it, or at least complex for me as a as a Melodian player. It really gives a very rich sort of texture to it. And it's really interesting to listen to. I think the basic story is there, but it's one of the only example I've come across really where it's accompanied by instruments, and it creates a very interesting atmosphere. I think well worth listening to. You can get it on YouTube
absolutely
as well.
Yeah, it's there. The ones I'll mention. If Andy Turner's ever done it, I always mention Andy Turner. He was one of the singer guests on this season of the podcast. In fact, a few weeks ago, his fantastic project, A Folk Song a Week, he recorded a version for that, and that's a different version altogether that we didn't mention even on the first half with Vic Gammon. Andy said he found that Cecil Sharp collected that from someone called Clark Longhurst in Ham Street in Kent in 1908, and that's got a different tune entirely, or maybe it's I think it might be similar in some respects. I've not had a chance to but yeah, Andy Turner, you can hear Andy singing that and accompanying himself on the concertina on his A Folk Song a Week project. That's the 7th of July 2013 if anyone's really interested in finding that one. Peter Bellamy did it as well, The Honest Labourer, and that's on but the only Peter Bellamy album I don't own because it's the one that has never had a reissue. 1985, his album called Second Wind. In fact, we mentioned that for Lord Randall because that was the end of last season on the podcast, and he did Lord Randall there as well. But so I haven't actually heard the Peter Bellamy one because I haven't got a copy of it. But whatever Bellamy did was always spectacular, and he sang a version which was. He said it was an amalgam of two versions, which was the Copper family of Sussex and the Frank Hinchliffe one. So he sort of put that one together out of the two versions, I think. I would imagine, without listening to it, I'd imagine he took the Hinchliffe one, Frank Hinchliffe, and then added the extra Copper verse into it. Maybe. But yeah, I highly recommend Bellamy. The entirety of that album, Second Wind, is available on YouTube, actually. I do know that, but I haven't listened to it yet. And then, we come on to various versions sung by the late, great, much missed Paul Sartin. As I'm sure we all know, Paul was taken from us just over 2 years ago, in fact, September of 2022. Paul did sing it a long time ago on an album with a band he was in, a very influential band for me, at least other people. The band Dr. Faustus, back in the early 2000s, was very influential. It was very exciting young band on the folk scene at the time. Was Paul and Rob Harbron and Tim Van Eycken and Benji Kirkpatrick, and they sang Thresherman. It's on their 2003 album, The First Cut. And I think that's their first album. It's their first album. And that's the Harry Holman of Copthorne in Sussex version, with the minor tune for that one. Years later, in 2017, when after Dr. Faustus only did two albums, 2003 and 2005, and they split up. But then years later, Paul Sartin and Benji Kirkpatrick reformed it, or kind of created a spiritual successor called Faustus with Saul Rose on Melodians, and that's the one you were mentioning. It came out. I saw them do it live, but it's on an EP they made called Slaves, and that's the Harry Holman one again. They just revamped the Dr. Faustus version as Faustus, and that's brilliant because it's Paul's singing was really, really wonderful to hear. And also Paul even did it again in a different version on an album with his duo with Paul Hutchinson called Belshazzar's Feast, and they were a wonderful addition to any folk gig. It was Belshazzar's Feast, and their album Find the Lady from 2011. That's Paul Sartin singing it again, and that's the words are from the Harry Holman one, but the melody is the Bob Copper one. So we've mixed and matched it the other way around. Which I think that's great when you do that. You come up with different versions of stuff. So that's a lovely one from Paul there. Yeah, so 3 ones of Paul Sartin singing. Dr. Faustus, Belshazzar's Feast, and Faustus. And then keeping things in a traditional manner in the family, Paul passed in 2022. And in 2023, Paul's sons, Joe and Will Sartin, sang that same version in Thresherman, the minor tune one from Harry Holman, on an EP they made together called When You're Ready. And that's, it's just fantastic to hear Paul's kids singing, Paul's grown-up children singing. That EP, I think, When You're Ready I think that might have been specifically a whole bunch of things that Paul had sung and played in his time, and so they were doing a tribute to him. But it's fantastic stuff. So anyway, Paul and Liz Davenport, the Dolly Mops, Will Noble, Peter Bellamy, Andy Turner, the 3 Paul Sartin versions, and Patacus is what they're called. Will and Joe Sartin's duo called Patacus. And great stuff. And that's a good list of recommendations. I will put the links to as many of those that I can find in the show notes.
Yep.
But I can see that time has run away from us, and we better draw this to a close. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
Thank you.
It's been very nice.
Yeah.
And I'll see you around on the Sheffield Carol scene, if not elsewhere in the Sheffield folk scene.
Right.
But for the time being, Vic Shepherd, John Bowden, thank you very much.
Thanks very much,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Bye.
A nobleman lived in the village of late. He had a poor thresherman whose family was great. He'd a wife and 7 children, and most of them were small, with nothing but his labour for to maintain them all. With nothing but his labour for to maintain them all. So carefree and constant each morning he went unto his daily labour with joy and content, with a flail on his shoulder and a bottle of beer, as happy as them that get 1,000 a year. As happy as them that get 1,000 a year. The nobleman met his poor thresherman one day, and kindly accosted him. Tell to me, I pray, you have a large family, I know it to be true. How canst thou maintain them so well as thou do? How canst thou maintain them so well as thou do? So
Sometimes I do reap, and sometimes I do mow, and other times to hedging and to ditching I do go. There's nothing comes amiss to me, I'll harrow, cart or plough. That's how I get my living, by the sweat of my brow. That's how I get my living, by the sweat of my brow. My wife, she is willing to join me in the yoke. We live just like two turtle doves, and seldom do provoke. Sometimes we are hard up, and sometimes very poor, but still we keep those raging wolves away from the door. But still we keep those raging wolves away from the door. When my day's work is over, I go home at night. My wife and my family are my delight. My children, they are prattling and playing with their toys, and these are the riches that a poor man enjoys. And these are the riches that a poor man enjoys. Oh, since you speak so well of your wife and family, I'll make you live happy all the rest of your days. Here's 50 acres of good ground I'll freely give to thee, to maintain thy wife and thy large family. To maintain thy wife and thy large family. Their tongues were not able all for to express the depth of their joy and their thankfulness. They've made many curtsies and bowed unto the ground. Such noble men there are few to be found. Such noble men there are few to be found.
That was Vic Shepherd and John Bowden singing The Nobleman and the Thresher. That brings us to the end of the episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on all the social medias. Facebook, Twitter, we're still there, Instagram, and also Blue Sky is a new addition for us. Just search those for In the Roud, a folk song podcast, and you'll find us. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. On places like Apple Music, there's a ratings button and a bit where you can write reviews. If you're listening on YouTube, please do click like on the videos, on the episodes, and also hit the subscribe button as well. And yes, also write very nice appreciative comments on the episodes would be very handy as well. It just all helps to boost the podcast's range and helps us reach a much wider audience. Another thing you can do if you're enjoying the podcast is you can join our Patreon. Yes, In the Roud has a Patreon. Ta-da! Woo! just go to patreon.com/intheroud, and for either a £5 or £10 a month subscription in support of the podcast, you'll receive weekly bonus episodes. You don't have to listen to them. That's just what you get for subscribing and helping me out with this mad endeavour. These episodes mainly focus on other songs from further on in the Roud Index, but also are episodes on other areas of folk song, including collectors and singers. So far, we've had a Singer's Choice mini-season with Nancy Kerr, a Collector Spotlight episode on the work and life of Sabin Baring Gould with Martin Graeber, and now we're in the middle of a mini-season devoted to traditional and local village carols. We've had village carols expert Ian Russell giving us an introduction episode, plus a whole episode on While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks by Night. And last week I was joined by Seb Stone to discuss The Star of Bethlehem. This week on the Carols mini-season on Patreon, I'm joined by Vic Gammon, and we looked into Roud 23,658. That's the carol See Seraphic Throngs Descending. Hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. And also, as if you couldn't tell from the myriad of questionable house decorations going up all over our neighbourhoods, and the fact that our Patreon is doing a Carols mini-season, Christmas is almost here. And now so is a range of In the Roud merchandise. Woo! Yeah! Why not treat yourself and others to some of our own brand merchandise? We've got stickers, mugs, tea towels, t-shirts and hoodies. Something for everyone. Unless what you wanted was a toilet made of solid gold. That's not what we do here at In the Roud. If you're interested in any of the merchandise, apart from the toilet of gold, simply go to merch.singyonder.co.uk. That's merch.singyonder.co.uk, and follow the menu link to In the Roud. I'll put a more direct link to that in the show notes. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Vic Gammon and Vic Shepherd and John Bowden. Join me next week for the final episode of this season, and indeed this year. We will be looking at Roud 20, which is the song The False Knight on the Road. My historical guest will be Steve Roud, and my singer guest will be Barry Goodman. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time. Quinn the Roud.